Welcome to my video, Watch Out the Trust Factor. Hardly anyone would disagree with the proposition that trust is important for human action. Without trust, any social interaction is difficult, if not impossible. Even Bitcoin enthusiasts need at least a certain amount of trust. Just think of the trust they put into the implementation of Satoshi Nakamoto's white paper in practice. Trust is particularly needed in the field of credit and money. In fact, it is vital for the smooth operation of a sophisticated financial system. Trust is indispensable for today's fiat money regime. Fiat money is created from thin air, mostly through bank credit expansion. Its quantity can be increased literally at any time, in any amount politically desired. Central banks hold the monopoly of central bank fiat money production, and commercial banks have a license to produce commercial bank fiat money on the basis of central bank fiat money. As experience shows, a fiat money regime is always at risk of producing too much money, leading to an excessive inflation rate. Just think of the period from 2020 to early 2023, when consumer goods price inflation in many countries skyrocketed. Why did it happen? In an attempt to fend off the fallout of the politically dictated lockdown crisis, central banks increased the quantity of fiat money by buying all kinds of credit instruments. The result was an enormous monetary overhang, which inflated consumer goods and asset prices. This development was accompanied by strong cost push factors. Supply-side bottlenecks led to upward pressure on production input prices. The green policy drove energy prices up. The war in Ukraine contributed to higher prices for virtually all commodities. The prevailing monetary overhang made it possible that the cost push factors translated into significantly higher prices, a process that resulted in sky-high inflation. At the same time, however, there was no flight from fiat currencies. Of course, many people complained about the decline in fiat money's purchasing power. But it is fair to say that most of them haven't lost their trust in fiat monies. It seems that people have retained their faith in central banks. Why? People are being told that sky-high inflation is due to cost-push developments, which are beyond the control of monetary policy. Such an explanation, if believed by the public, tends to dispel any doubt about central banks' inflation-fighting credibility. Let me say incorrectly so, as inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon, to use the words of the US economist Milton Friedman. What is more, people seem to have remained confident that central banks are in a position to bring inflation down, and that the currently sky-high inflation will be a temporary rather than a permanent evil. Even the latest turmoil in the US banking market or the excessive rise in government debt around the world have not significantly, let alone permanently, affected people's confidence in the fiat US dollar or other fiat monies. By and large, investors seem to remain convinced that nothing terrible will happen to fiat monies. Inflation expectations, as measured by, for example, inflation-indexed bond yields or inflation swaps, remained relatively contained. It shows that investors are not expecting runaway inflation. Price increases for consumer and producer goods are still quite high, but they have largely lost momentum in recent months. Moreover, indicators of stress in financial markets have remained fairly low. To put things into perspective, stress levels during the US banking sector turmoil in March 2023 were only 40% of the level seen during the lockdown crisis in 2020, and it was only 20% of the stress level in the great financial and economic crisis of 2008-2009. Markets express confidence that a credit crisis is not even remotely imminent. This may come as a surprise to many, but confidence in the fiat money regime is alive and well, at least according to the price developments in financial markets. This leads to the question, are investors expecting the impossible? Of course, central banks can bail out the economic and financial system in times of crisis. This, however, would require the issuance of additional fiat money to keep struggling borrowers afloat. High inflation would be the result. Or central banks reduce the growth rate of the money supply to lower future inflation. This, however, would almost certainly trigger a drop in output and employment and cause credit defaults, which would put severe pressure on the highly leveraged fiat money system. Or will central bankers succeed in lowering inflation while at the same time preventing the economies from going into a severe recession? If the latter were the case, investors would indeed expect the impossible. The latest series of interest rate hikes by central banks are already leading to a sharp decline in credit and money supply growth in many countries. In real, that is inflation-adjusted terms, the growth rate of credit and money is already deep in negative territory. It indicates a decline in consumers' and firms' real spending power and portends a looming recession. We believe there is a relatively high probability that the slowdown of the world economy will be more severe in the coming quarters than consensus estimates suggest, and that the downward pressure on goods price inflation resulting from slower credit and money supply growth will be much more pronounced. We also believe that central banks' interest rates will not remain at elevated levels for long, but will sooner rather than later be cut to much lower levels, keeping real, that is inflation-adjusted interest rates in negative territory. This in turn clearly has the potential to prompt investors to reassess the risk-reward situation in financial markets. While the trust factor among investors is currently high, it will likely fall. With this in mind, we see a good chance that investor interest in precious metals as a store of value and hedge against the whims of the fiat money system will soon be propelled to much higher levels, because it will become increasingly obvious that fiat monies are not and will never be a reliable store of value. Physical gold and silver offer savers and investors a much needed alternative. Thank you very much for your attention. If you enjoyed the video, please like and share it, ring the bell and follow my channel.